Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of many programs for True Crime Incorporated. This is Joseph St. John. I've had about 30 years in law enforcement, have gone through the ranks, started off as an officer, and ended my career in Columbus, Mississippi as the chief. I got to be in charge of a lot of different organizations as far as within the department, to including homicide, being in charge of special victims and being in charge of even the crime scene search unit. So got a little experience there. And I'm going to introduce a couple of people who are going to help me during this one. I've been involved in this before, and there'll be a link down there with two average Joes. But for today's episode and for things that are occurring on here, I'm going to get some other partners. And I'm going to start off with Dean. Dean, introduce yourself. Let people know a little bit about you.
Okay, my name is Dean Teaster. I live in Southeast Michigan. I am an independent investigator of cold cases. I became interested a couple of years ago, actually probably more like 15 years ago, when I was part of a motion picture called An Ordinary Killer. And then I slowly migrated into getting on the internet and looking around and things of that nature. But what drives me is the fact that there are cold case files where people are missing. And that's what drives me.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And my second partner, and we're going to get to that, is Deneen. She is my niece. And Deneen's going to tell you a little bit about herself. She's my right-hand man most of the time on most of the things we do.
Hi, I'm Deneen Azzolino, and I live in Eastern Connecticut. And I've always loved the true crime. And I got involved with my uncle, Joe, and I started watching his Two Average Joes channel. And I started really getting into it more and more. And then I got on board with Joe, and we started this journey.
We've done a lot, and Dean's came aboard, and he has been a gigantic help. Today's lesson, that's what we thought. Today's program is going to be What is Truth? And I think that's very important when we get into true crime. And let me explain to you why. Most of us are busy. Most of us are trying very, very hard just to keep our head above water. But we do like true crime, or we like politics, or we like whatever we like, even to the point that there's sports can be pulled into this. So you ask, what is truth? And what I'm really trying to do, and what Dean and Deneen's going to help me do, is to explain to you a lot of what we get on the internet. I'm not saying it's not true, it's just a half truth. And I'm starting to see where people, it's very easy to do a Google search or pull something off the internet and go, oh, this is true. But here's the problem. I think that's what's happening with a lot of things that are considered to be true crime, or even politics, which is scary. And that is, people read one or two articles. They don't do any research. And then they get on social media and talk crazy. Okay. And it's probably time for, when people do these programs, to point that out. I'll give you an interesting aspect of where we're at right now as far as journalism. I think it was a couple of days ago, I was watching a program on the YouTube channels, and basically the accusation, I do believe it was an accusation, is that Sports Illustrated, which at one time was the biggest sports publication in America, is now using IA writers to write their articles. That means artificial intelligence. And this particular group of people at Sports Illustrated went as far as creating pictures of them using AI. So you had a story written by IA, and they showed a picture in a biography written by IA. And that's really what we're kind of up against. And so I don't want to make it sound like, the hyperbole is, oh, everything's a lie, but it's getting harder to find the truth. And one thing, and I think Dean will speak to this, Dean has done a lot of real investigating. And Dean has done a lot of things where he's went and got FOIA, which are Freedom of Information Acts. He's went and tried to get, real information. And that is not as easy as you think it would be. And just a couple of times, I think, Dean, I can speak for you, where you look where we thought somebody had been said that they were on parole, and actually they were out. But it took you to do real investigation. But this would be a good time, Dean, for you to just kind of interject how difficult it can be, especially even using FOIA, which, by the way, they have to legally give you information. But let me emphasize, they have to give you good information. They have to give you information. Let us know what happened.
Well, I guess I'll start with saying that my preliminary search is done through Google Chrome.
Right.
And I collect data there. And then I go back on a second wave and I try to verify that data. And that's where things start to get a little bit confusing. I try to match it with a good source called MyHeritage that I found to be a very good source for ancillary documents such as census documents, marriages, addresses, phone numbers, going back as much as 50 years. I'm quite surprised. So I can do a lot of verifications there. But then again, you're dealing with what's out there that's been regurgitated by someone else that picked it up from someone else. And just like, okay, put the stoplight on here for a second. What really happened? So in this one crime that I'm investigating, I had to find out if a person was actually in prison. Google said that he was. Okay. I talked to some friends and things like that that were kind of associated with that. And I said, hey, what do you think about this? Oh, he was in prison. Okay. So I decided to file my first FOIA. And I waited a couple of weeks. I got an envelope in the mail right here. And it had a piece of paper in it, one piece of paper. And right at the bottom was my answer. The man was not in prison during the time frame that I was looking for. He was actually out on parole. And back then, parole means, hey, first off, you don't have one of those things around your ankles because they weren't invented then in the time frame that I'm looking at. But it meant that once a week you go to a parole officer and report in, but the rest of the week you're out there free doing whatever. Hopefully no crime.
Just short of getting caught on something, there's a lot of truth what you just said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started getting into FOIA request number 2, 3, and 4. And that's where the difficulty came into play. As an example, this is one FOIA request. If you can see this, there's no redaction. There's almost 270 pages there with no redaction. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
Found a lot of interesting things. And then I got to the next one, and you'll see the redactions. I have a stack of nouns, verbs, pronouns, adverbs, conjunctive sentences with no subject, place, date, or thing.
Right. And people run into that, gang. So if you're watching this for the first time, they run into it.
Each one of these costs money.
Yes.
This pack here, as an example, was $380. And I got a bunch of black boxes. Now, it was nice that the lady that I got it from did have a discussion with me, which I appreciated. And she taught me something that was really enlightening. And that is, whatever entity you're writing to, let's say it's a prosecutor's office, let's say it may be a sheriff's office, a prison office, each person that works with those FOIAs has been trained by a person. The trainers all are training people different.
Mhm.
There's
And
no
that's within one
streamlining.
agency, right? Within one agency.
Pardon?
That could be within one agency.
Yes.
Different people trained.
And this person I spoke to told me just that. In her office alone, there's like 10 people that do FOIAs. And she said there's conflict all the time because one person says, well, all this has to be redacted. And the other person says, well, no. But think about it this way. Let's say James Dean did a crime in 1970, and it's published all over the internet. The whole trial is on the internet. You can find it. It's pretty much public domain. And you submit a FOIA to say, I want to see from the prosecutor's office what you have on the James Dean crime in 1970. You would expect that James Dean's name wouldn't be redacted because that's who you asked for.
Right.
That's not the case.
I think that's where I think when we start talking to people and we want people to come on board and we want, any of the cases that we had talk about eventually or even today, I'm talking about doing this. We want people's information. We have a couple of people, all three of us, that we want to line up to do some interviews with. But you would think getting information would be, on some of these cases, 40 and 50 years old. And yet we're still seeing that we're not getting any information. So what I worry about, and this is kind of why we have this first program and this first step, is when people run into blanks and they either run out of money or run out of time or run out of patience, they just start regurgitating things off the internet. We did on Two Average Joe, we did a pretty intensive look at John Norman Collins. And when I look back and I watched some videos that were done on him, and I watched some what we'll call YouTube work that was done on him, it basically roots into 2 or 3 articles, 2 or 3 stories. And in the case of John Norman, what was weird was that the books that were written about him, at least 2 of them, did not use his name, nor use the victim's name, which made it even more difficult for us. Now, I don't have a reason why they did that, gang. I don't know. I think Dean hit a home run. It was in the newspaper. Okay.
Right.
John Norman Collins was not an unknown person, and his victims were not unknown. But at least 2 of the better books written about him literally do not mention him by name, the right name, or his victims, which meant finding things to be extremely difficult.
Very hard to follow.
As we get ready on True Crime Incorporated, as we move ahead, and there's some cases that we're going to work on, just some of them are old. And when I say old, that means they're 40 or 50 years old. They're still extremely important in the sense of crime. There are still victims that were victimized. But one of the things we have found very, very interesting is you would think that, oh, well, it was that old, everybody's going to talk. No, just doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. And, even in cases that you think and it's weird, probably the most known case is Charles Manson. And by the way, by no definition is he a serial killer. Okay? Under no definition is he a serial killer. Okay? It's just those crimes captured the nation. Being in and around Hollywood is a big deal. The fact that Sharon Tate was a movie star was a big deal. But when you read Helter Skelter and you go, oh, well, we know everything. Well, actually not. There's a whole lot of things going on. There's a drug angle to that. There's and I'll put a link in the description here or something that you can read with it. There was a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of different connections, a lot of people involved. So even in cases that you think you know, there's a good chance that a lot is missing. You know,
Mhm.
who is to say why people do that? I mean, we don't know. In a way, going back on what Dean was saying, I sense that a lot of times with agencies, and I just spend a day or two there, 30 years, they can at times be overly protective. And you can say, oh, I understand that. But if you're too overly protective, then I think people start looking and asking why. Okay. And Deneen, one of the things we did, we've had a situation where we've worked with a couple of cases, and Deneen's like, you know, you had thought everybody would be talking about this, and they're not. It's like, one of the things was with John Norman Collins was you would have thought everything would have tied together easier on that particular co-ed murders. But when you were watching the video, you were thinking that, but there was time where they almost went too far to put everything together and put it on one person.
Right. And another thing is when everybody usually uses Google as their research, and they go right to that. And then when you look at other websites, I've used DuckDuckGo a couple times, and I've found more information on DuckDuckGo than I found on Google. And it's just weird how the situation and the different stories you find on there. And it just blew my mind when I was looking for information on certain cases and stuff.
And yeah, so let me add this to everybody that's looking. Look, I'm not against Wikipedia.
Right.
Right? There's things on Wikipedia that's good, but the other part is, most of the cases that you would be interested, they get a lot more complicated, and they get a lot more. They just go and do a lot more depth than that.
Mhm.
So we don't want to make it sound like you don't need to use Google or use Wikipedia. We're not saying that. What we're trying to say is that is not the beginning and the middle of it. And if you're doing it, and let me clarify something. If you're doing it because you just want to entertain yourself, that's fine. In other words, sometimes I just look at stuff because I want to entertain. But if you're going to sit here and really invest the time to investigate or really know something about something, you're going to have to take the time to look deeper. And one of the things I think, Dean, is, I think without exposing all the names yet,
Right.
how some things just happen by chance. You've managed to meet a couple of people that are going to help us out.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And right in the middle of, well, it was, in fact, it was this week and I wasn't expecting it. Met a guy who was actually working on the same cases that I'm looking at, we're looking at. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah. And I will tell you this to give everybody a bit of a warning, kind of a heads up. You do have to talk to eyewitnesses. Now, one of the things that I think happens with eyewitnesses is that make sure they were there. Okay, because look, just because somebody said they witnessed something doesn't even mean they're there. Okay. Understand the weirdness, and I don't have an answer for this, gang. But everybody that's ever worked law enforcement, especially if they worked homicide or was involved in any sort of major investigation, people will confess the crimes they did not do. Okay. There's another interesting thing, and I think anybody that's ever watched documentaries know this. And that is, they are people that interject themselves into the story. So when they're telling their story, whether it's a documentary or they're doing a movie, they interject themselves as being more important. Okay. I watched one recently where it was like girls meeting with person and the girl gets in trouble, get a little bit of disagreement, um, ends up that person A winds up killing person B. Okay, the girl. But if you listen to the girl's story, what she wanted to tell you is about what she did and how she was involved. I'm like, actually, you're just a witness. Unfortunately, you're still alive that you can tell the story, but you really didn't do anything afterwards for this other girl's protection. If the story you told is true, that you sense this horrible stuff, then maybe you should have called the police that night. Maybe you should have told somebody. Maybe you should have been a good witness 40 years ago. Okay.
Right.
And you got to be careful with witnesses because, like I said, often they'll interject themselves in the story and put a spin on it where they look good. And we'll do another episode down the road sooner than later where we discuss that eyewitnesses are not the best. They are not the best evidence. Okay. And get into the fact that people identify people when they shouldn't. People interject themselves in the cases they have no business doing. Every time I watch a documentary and they say, and then we opened up the phone lines, I'm thinking, and you got 8 zillion calls that had nothing to do with this case. And when you could have been investigating it, you were chasing your tails.
Yeah.
Okay. And that hurts people's feelings. They're like, well, Joe, we were trying to help. No, you weren't. You just wanted to get involved. Okay. One of the things that 30 years of law enforcement gave me, I'm not sure you're trying to help. I'm not even remotely close. Matter of fact, I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You just picked up the phone and called because you wanted to be in the middle. Now you ran us down a rabbit hole where we could have been looking for a real case. Okay. There you got that. Okay. So we want to really focus on that. So when we go, what is truth? And, we really ask that tough question. Understand that we're all a little bit polluted in our belief system. We bring it to us. We bring it to every judgment that we make. We bring our own biases to. But I think that what we're going to do on True Crime here Incorporated is really break down why we're looking at it, what we're doing. And as we get further down the line and show you the cases that we're working on, we're going to show you the real work that we did. Some of it comes up good. We get real witnesses. Some of it comes up really good. We get real information. Then other time, poor Dean's got 200 pages or whatever it was. I know he sent me several pages that looked like just somebody took a magic marker to. Okay.
Yeah.
And in other cases, we've worked going back to Two Average Joes. On the John Norman Collins case, we had somebody say there was a set of bloody seat covers.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody has got any evidence of that. None. Now, those were murders. Okay. Those weren't shoplifting. Okay. So that's really what we want to focus on when we go and we do this True Crime Incorporated. And when Deneen and Dean and me do it, we're going to bring some guests along. We're going to have some people that are legitimate witnesses, legitimate experts on these cases. Legitimately, if everything works out, Dean, we'll have some people that actually worked on some of these cases.
Right.
Okay. So not a lot of secondhand news there. But that's really what we asked our people to do that are going to enjoy this, and I think people will enjoy this site. So we want you to subscribe. We want you to follow us. Send us a comment down below. I'm going to have a link also for Two Average Joes. That's Robert Baker's and my site, and show you some stuff we did with the John Norman Collins case. But this one, we're going to be working both sides. Robert Baker will be involved with the Two Average Joes, and then the three of us are going to be doing this one, and we'll bring some people on. So, anything you want to add to that, Dean?
Yeah, you had brought up something interesting earlier, talking about artificial intelligence and
Yes.
how it's now coming out on the internet. So I had an interesting experience last week. I went ahead and got an artificial intelligence program,
Oh
brought it
my.
into my computer, and I wanted it to help me with search. So I would enter search terms on a case that I'm looking at.
Mm.
And it was a victim's name.
Right.
It was a person that died. And I put in a search string. And what I got back told me everything I needed to know. It came back and said this person had killed another person and had spent her life in prison. And I'm like, wait a minute, did I type something wrong? So I went back and looked at my search string, and the search string was perfect. But it really kind of just made me realize that I think all of the artificial intelligence search engines that are out there, they're going to Google.
Yeah.
And just looking at all the stuff we've already looked at, and this machine, this computer brings sections or sentences or paraphrases and tries to assemble something by adding their own nouns and verbs and such. And it just really was an eye-opening experience for me. So I would not recommend that.
Right.
Try, but I wouldn't recommend it.
I saw one where they offer to write your stuff for you.
Yes.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
it's like, now I'm comfortable, I can write, right? But I'm like, what does that mean in the future, that you're just going to pump information in there and they're going to just diddle with it? You know, doesn't mean it's accurate, by the way. They just said they'd write it for you.
You know, it's interesting because years ago I was a computer specialist. I ran mainframe facilities here in Michigan, a large DECVAX environments, IBMs and such. And one of the interesting things about that is we always would say junk in, junk out.
Right.
Same thing here.
Yeah.
But now it's just all over the internet now.
Yeah. You know, go ahead.
Oh, I think you brought it up a while back when we've been talking about cut and paste history.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of this comes down to, is people just cutting and pasting and making their own stories, their own narrative, how they want to put a spin on things, and not really having the truth out there.
Listen, I'm an old man. An old man. So this is an old man alert. I remember when I had to handwrite, and we were doing research papers, handwrite on a card, an index card. And I had to put the index card information in a paper. And then I had to document where I got this stuff from. Okay. I go back to college after 137 years and realized that I was in college with people who are cutting and pasting, which is easier than using a index card. Okay. But what I was stunned about was they weren't documenting their source.
Exactly.
I'm like, look, high school and college was about learning how to do a research paper and documenting your stuff. And now we've gotten so huge that people just put it out there, and it is cut and paste history.
That's interesting. That's interesting thing that you just said is preserving your source or
Yeah.
documenting that. Now, I just sent to Deneen 2 weeks ago, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 emails. I'm not quite sure how many there were.
Quite a few.
Basically what it was just exactly, Joseph, what you said. It's preserving, like I have a big worksheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and if somebody says to me, well, where'd you get that? I can go back to those things that I sent
Right.
you and say,
Mhm.
well, right here's where I got it.
Yeah, see,
And
that's one of the reasons we were talking about the spreadsheet a couple of days ago, Dean. And I said, just keep doing it because we
Right.
have to be able to trace back what we're doing because we're trying very hard to keep away from that cut and paste stuff. And I think that rather it turns into books, podcasts, we do a documentary, it doesn't matter what the end results are. But I want us to be on the side where we can show, as they used to say back in the day, we can show our work.
I had one more situation I'd like to share with everybody if I could.
Okay.
Did some research it started, when it started quite a few months back, but I was looking at addresses of a suspect.
Right.
And I was so lucky because I had found a historical document that laid out the addresses where this person lived for 30 some years. I'm like, wow, bingo. Now I've got a chain of movement. And I started building on that. But one of the addresses, what was really funny about it is a very complete address. But when you went to Google Earth and you put the address in, it didn't exist. I'm like, huh. So that haunted me for probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. And I haven't sent you the update on that yet. But long and short of it, I started doing a global search of the address in the surrounding area. I don't know what made me think of that, but I did. And guess what? Bingo, got it. What had happened was the census taker back in 1992 put the town down, not realizing he was just over the border in another town. So the address actually exists, but it's 7 miles away.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that we're going to do too to tag this along, to go along with it, a lot of these people that perpetuate these crimes are very familiar with cross-pollinating these jurisdictions because it makes it more difficult to investigate the crime. Okay. And so when you look up a record and the record's wrong, you have already added an extra layer of complexity because you already had guys that were doing crimes that were mixing up the jurisdictions to cause local police to have a problem. Okay. So those are just some things to cut, to just for everybody to think about. But look, we're going to wind up. There's going to be some links down there. Hit subscribe, hit like, do the things you need to do. Help us out. We're going to cover it and we really appreciate it. And just look forward to some more. We'll have something probably coming up in a few weeks. Definitely would like to do one more of these before the Christmas holiday. Okay. So everybody say goodbye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.